I'm delighted to be here today with two Vidwans of Sanskrit because, the title of this session is Treasures of Sanskrit, and that is really a very wide ocean, because I think Sanskrit as a language and the kinds of manuscripts, literature, knowledge traditions that it sort of encompasses is really an ocean, and it's very, very difficult, I think, for us to compress all of that in 47 minutes and 10 seconds. So we're very fortunate we have Oscar and Jim here with us today. I would like to request you to just begin by telling us very briefly about your work and the treasures that, tangible and intangible, that your work has led you to in Sanskrit. If you could both just say a little bit.
Is this on? You can hear me, yeah. Well, Swati, thank you very much for talking to us today. Thanks, everyone, for coming. My work and the treasures of Sanskrit. Well, I'm unusual in that I've been studying Sanskrit since I was an undergraduate, so since I was 18. And I've also spent a lot of time in India, mainly, as was mentioned in my introduction, living with traditional Indian yogis and in a particular Sampradaya, particular lineage. And so my research work has focused mainly on the history of yoga. And I work from manuscripts. So I think for me, there are many, as you said, Sanskrit is the metaphor in Sanskrit is a ratnakara, an ocean that is absolutely full of full of jewels. And for me, I work directly from manuscripts. This is a really important thing. And I think what's so exciting about the world of Sanskrit and Sanskrit research is the sheer number of manuscripts out there. When I've been living with the Ramanandi Sampradaya, I've been to many Kumbh Melas, and I often compare the difficulty of counting how many Sanskrit manuscripts there are to counting how many pilgrims go to the Kumbh Mela. Both are really an impossible task, but strangely enough, the best estimates when they're put together come to the same number. So the number of people bathing on the main day of the Kumbh Mela and the number of Sanskrit manuscripts in existence is thought to be about 30 million, so 3 crore. Okay, and to put that in comparison with the classics, okay, Latin and Greek, there are thought to be 30,000 only. So you've got 30,000, 30 million. And of those 30 million, only, probably in the last century, only about 1% have even been studied, even been looked at, okay, let alone studied. So there's a lot of jewels, treasures out there waiting to be discovered. And you asked which ones I work on. So I mainly look at, as I said, manuscripts of texts on yoga.
It's really a joy to be here, Swati, with you and with James Mallinson for this session on the treasures of Sanskrit. Basically, my story is I started Sanskrit back in Spain, most as a self-taught person. And my discovery of Sanskrit was quite accidental. I never was meant to be a Sanskrit specialist. But it was because of my first trip to India. I had the chance to read the Gita in an English translation, which was not very good. Even my English was very bad. But in spite of the translation being bad, the reader knowing very little English, something clicked in my mind. And I was really struck by that book, which was unknown to me. And then I made the decision to learn Sanskrit, to read the Gita in the original. I did that, and then I came to Varanasi, and I did my BA, MA, PhD. PhD is in Sanskrit grammar at BHU. I work with also a Sanskrit manuscript from Bangladesh, actually Tantra Pradeep from my PhD. But I have not, unlike James, I have not pursued the manuscripts. Basically, my main task has been to produce 2 Sanskrit dictionaries. One is Sanskrit Catalan, which is a very small language in Spain, which is my mother tongue. And the other one, Sanskrit to Spanish, which is the first Sanskrit-Spanish dictionary. It has about 64,000 words. And it has also something which I consider very important, which it's, as far as I know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the only dictionary that gives 2 kinds of etymologies for Sanskrit words. One is according to Western philology, which is basically a diachronical or historical kind of philology, and it gives the etymologies from the Sanskrit Etymological Dictionary by Maya Hofer. And the other etymology is the etymology by and Sanskrit grammarians, by Panini and grammarians. So you have both views there in a single document. And beyond that, lately I've been basically working on producing popular translations of major Sanskrit works. I just finished publishing the Bhagavad Gita in Spanish, and for the general reader. And I also translate the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and that's basically right now my line of work.
Thank you, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But Jim, when you were talking about your work and the emphasis on manuscripts, there is almost, in your quest for manuscripts and the kinds of manuscripts that turn up almost serendipitously sometimes, there's almost an Indiana Jones kind of quality. And I don't know if you agree or disagree, but that's what I was struck by. So would you like to talk a little bit about this pursuit of manuscripts and the serendipitous discovery of something that you didn't expect to find there? Because that's also a part of treasure, isn't it? A treasure is also something that we discover in this fashion. So if you could.
Sure, yeah. There was a very brilliant, very famous Indian Sanskritist called D.D. Kosambi. And he had this sort of maxim, this aphorism, that the value of a manuscript was inversely proportional to the difficulty in getting hold of it. And that does normally seem to be the way. If you try really hard for years to get hold of something, and when it arrives, it normally doesn't tell you anything new. But and then when they just fall into your hands, they can be particularly useful. And this happened to me really perfectly encapsulated this maxim. Actually, the last time I was here in Jaipur for the literary festival, and I took the afternoon away from the festival to go to the City Palace Museum. There's a Sanskrit manuscript library there. And it was kind of on a whim. I thought there might be one particular manuscript I was after. And very few of the manuscripts in existence have been catalogued. Sometimes there's sort of hand lists. And there they had been sort of catalogued but not published. And so I had to they gave me a CD-ROM, and then there was an Excel spreadsheet. And I searched for the word yoga on it. And actually, the one I was looking for did come up, but then also up came this name Yoga Bhaskara, which means the son of yoga. And I was like, oh, hang on. Because this is a text that people have been writing about. There was a well-known Indian Sanskritist called P.K. Gode who first brought attention to it in the 50s. And it gets mentioned in a few later texts and so forth. But no one had ever found it. In fact, it's also listed in... We have a catalogue from the 17th century of this famous Sanskritist from Banaras called Kavindracharya Saraswati, and it was listed there among his 2,000 manuscripts, but it was thought to be lost completely. And then there it was, and I was quickly, bring me that one, forget the one I was looking for, and they brought it up, and sure enough, it was quite short, and I was able to confirm straight away that the quotations that I'd seen in later texts were from that particular text. So I very rapidly copied the whole thing out and edited it, and it's the first text to combine sort of Krishna devotion with physical yoga practice, written about 1600. Yeah, but like I said, it just fell into my lap completely by chance.
Oscar, do you have any such Indiana Jones moments as well in your pursuit?
I have one.
Not
like him. I mean, I think he has many. And I have one Indiana Jones episode with manuscript in Bangladesh, actually. When I went to collect the manuscript for my PhD, I went to Rajshahi. It's a border town in Bangladesh. And I was doing research in Sanskrit grammar. That was my PhD. And I was searching also a manuscript which is not found complete, as far as we know. We know that there is a single manuscript in the house of some Pandit that lived there about 150 years ago. So when I went to the Barendra Museum in Rajshahi to collect, my book was called Tantra Pradipa. Here, Tantra doesn't mean what you think, the Tantra, but Tantra in Sanskrit means many things. As you say, Panchatantra, it means Grantha, it means book. It means also Siddhanta, which means doctrine or teaching. So here, Tantra Pradipa meant the light of the doctrine, the light of the grammatical doctrine. No? So I went there to the museum, and a small detail, it was the last week of Ershad rule in Bangladesh. So I had to face, almost a coup d'etat when I was there at the university. And the interesting thing is that when I went to search for the manuscript, of course, it was not in the right place. It was not under Vyakaran, under grammar. It was under Tantra, in spite of not being a manuscript of Tantra, which shows the kind of knowledge that sometimes librarians have today, you know, about. And I remember I was very excited. I took the manuscript out, and I remember that they started photographing it. I didn't have any permit, actually, you know. I mean, I just went there, you know, and I asked them in good faith. So it was very nice because it was lunchtime. They put all the manuscripts in front of me. I started shooting all the photographs. And lunchtime came to an end. And then the curator of the museum came and said, you cannot do this. But it was good because I already had the photograph and they allowed me to take. So that was my Indiana Jones moment regarding manuscripts.
Yes, no, that's fascinating. There is the national mission for manuscripts that India has, and do you want to tell us something a bit about the work that it has done and what more it can do? Because I think a lot of us may not be familiar with the kind of work that is still required to properly catalog and conserve all the 30 million manuscripts that are supposed to be out there. So.
Yeah, well, this is an amazing initiative started, I think it must be 2 or 3 decades ago, in order to try to catalogue and photograph all the Sanskrit manuscripts in India, which is a huge task. And in fact, it's almost, I think it's a bit like that parable of in Scotland they have the fourth bridge of you start painting it, and by the time you get to the end you have to paint it again, because I mean I've been looking through some of the scans they have, and you've got photographs of printouts from microfilms from 30 years ago when they first started. And the microfilms are all fading, and so anyway, then you try to go to the library to try to find the original, and often that's impossible. But it is an amazing initiative, and last I heard they had photographed about 250,000 manuscripts, and in theory they're going to make them publicly available, although that's yet to happen. I know that's the sort of court cases rumbling on about that, so hopefully soon they'll be made accessible to all scholars. But at the moment you have to go to the I haven't been there for a few years, so I don't know if it's been knocked down, but the IGNCA in Delhi, because I heard that they're changing that whole area, but you used to have to go there and then look at the database there to see them.
Their website doesn't upload. I mean, I tried very hard, but sadly. But that's something that definitely India does need to work on.
Yeah, I just add that they're doing a lot better than Oxford, though, to be honest. We have 8,700 Sanskrit manuscripts, of which maybe a third are catalogued in hand lists, but only, and a few small catalogues have been published, but there's only 7 have been digitized and are available online. There's a program's just started to do another 100, but yeah, there's such a huge amount. And so we don't even know what treasures we have there in Oxford, and that's only 8,700. So.
Oscar, talking about specific treasures, you were talking about the entire debt that the field of phonetics owes to Sanskrit. So would you like to just give us a taste of that, because it's fascinating?
Thanks very much for putting this question, because I think, we are forgetting now, and in the West we are forgetting, because almost 200 years have elapsed, the impact that the discovery of Sanskrit had on the West. It really changed many things there. And I have here a quotation made by a British scholar, which is really worth reading, This is Arthur MacDonald, which I think he was a Boden professor, which you are also, no? And Arthur MacDonald said, since the Renaissance, there has been no events of such worldwide significance in the history of culture as the discovery of Sanskrit literature in the later part of the 18th century. These are big words. Maybe he was exaggerating, okay? Because he says, since the Renaissance, there's been no event of such worldwide significance. And it truly, it had such an impact, the discovery of Sanskrit for Europe, that in the 19th century, Sanskrit chairs were open all over the world, even in Spain, by the way, which after was closed, because Sanskrit was considered, what we'll say today, high technology. It was really so new, I can put you some of the examples, and you were saying about phonetics. Phonetics, you may understand that if Western grammarians had not come to India and stay here and learn with Sanskrit pandits, I doubt the modern linguistics will have the form that it has today. And that's a big thing to say, you know. I put you one example, for instance, of phonetics. Phonetics is a science which was discovered by Indians, you know, it was called Shiksha. It was discovered because they have to preserve the right pronunciation of the Veda, right? And with that obsession in mind, they began, you know, really investigating, not in the metaphysical or the symbolic, they did that too, of the meaning of the letters, but in their phonetic values. Okay, now today, we say ma, ba are labial sounds, okay? Why are labial? Because I use the lips, okay? We say that ta, da are dental because I put the tip of the tongue back of my teeth. I say the cha, nya are palatal because my tongue goes up. All these terms, which have been adopted into Western phonetics, were already in use before Panini, so before the 4th century before Christ. So they've been in use for 2,500 years, and they are the same terms. Sanskrit uses for occlusive consonants, which means consonants that obstruct the flow of air. This comes from Sanskrit sparsha, okay, and that became the occlusive, and etc. So it's really amazing to see. And now I can multiply many instances regarding phonetics, regarding linguistics, how India was so fundamental in advanced study of language all over the world. No? And that's something really unique. I will stop here now for a minute, if you want, and give, because I don't want. This I call, I mean, this is an exaggerating way of speaking, but this I call the second Sanskrit revolution. Because there was another one before that one. This was 18th, 19th century. It's very well known, and it determined, you know, if you have Sanskrit chairs, it's because of that today. But there was another one. We talk later. I think we can continue with the conversation.
I was also going to ask about all the, so we've been talking about the treasures, and there are many, many, but there are also these imagined treasures, quote unquote, which are, I mean, there's a growing propensity today to say that, oh, ancient India, you know, was so proficient in many different areas like plastic surgery or aeronautics or flying aircrafts, and attribute it to Sanskrit texts. I'm calling them imagined treasures because it's not always certain whether they are actually in Sanskrit texts or in what format. So if you would like to weigh in on that phenomenon.
It's a slightly thorny issue, isn't it? But I haven't got a lot of experience with that, apart from I did have the great privilege of I worked for a project called the Clay Sanskrit Library, and I produced, I think, 5 volumes of translations of Sanskrit poetry. And one of the texts I translated was called the Bruhat Katha Shloka Sangraha, and we called it its short translation, the Emperor of the Sorcerers. And I was reminded of this the other day with this talk of flying machines. I know there's a text. There's a very interesting story. I think they called it something like the Vimana Purana or something, which came out. Well, it was supposedly discovered in the 20th century. It was meant to be an ancient, sort of how to DIY manual of how to build your own flying machine from ancient times. But it was fairly quickly proven to be a modern composition. So we can leave that aside. But within this text, which was written probably 8th, 9th century, there's a very funny story, in fact, about flying machines and about a queen being, very keen. She wants to ride around the sky in a flying machine. I think it might have been a pregnancy craving. These stories are full of queens having pregnancy cravings that then people go to great lengths to fulfill. And so they hunt down. It's a very long story, so I'll condense it, make it very brief. But they hear about this one craftsman who's meant to be able to build a flying machine, and at first he refuses and he says it's too difficult. But then what he does say is that the only people who really know about this are the Greeks. Okay, so he says that this science has come from Greece and it's not indigenous to India. But then if one then looks in earlier Greek texts, there are actually mentions, descriptions of flying machines in some 3rd, 4th century BC classical Greek texts, but they're sort of balloons, and they're not for carrying people. I mean, I think they probably did use balloons, so maybe it's come through that. But to my knowledge, there are no Sanskrit texts old ones that will tell you how to build a flying machine. But there are plenty of flying machines in them, but they're fantastical, let's face it.
Oscar, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes. No, another area which is as you say, Sanskrit has such interesting material still there, I think, that can be extracted from the commentaries and be used, that we do not need to go for fake claims, like inventing the submarine or flying machines 3,000 years ago or 5,000. There is no need for that, and that is even childish, because you have such a powerful, and I will give another example. There is also a lot of talk about Sanskrit being the best language for computers. That's nonsense, actually. I'm sorry to tell, because computers are machines. Machines, they understand machine language. And machine language basically is long strings of zeros and ones. There's nothing else about that. Then you have other languages on top of that, okay? But what did Sanskrit, and here comes the interesting part, Sanskrit did invent computational linguistics, which is another thing, which is how to compute and how to make algorithms, to make a grammar machine or a grammar device. That's a different thing. And to cut it short, the wonder that is Panini. Panini, he was 4th century before Christ. He wrote the Ashtadhyayi. Ashtadhyayi is the classical Sanskrit grammar. Every Sanskrit lover in India knows that, and I suffer that also. It's not an easy book to go through. And then in Panini wrote his book. He wrote about 4,000 sutras, yogas. No, they are not sutras. They are 4,000 rules. So briefly written, And in these 4,000 rules, he describes such a huge language as Sanskrit. He describes the etymology of the words. He gives the basis, and he describes even dialects of Sanskrit existing, different varieties of Sanskrit, from Rigvedic Sanskrit to classical Sanskrit. All is there, even options. And if you print these 4,000 rules, you will have a small book of 30 pages. Imagine that. How he was able to compress. It is said, many people say, and I've seen that, if you decode those 30 pages into natural language with all the neat explanations, you get almost a 500-page book. A couple of people have done that already here in India, right? So from 30 pages to 500 pages, he, really put all his ingenuity in making a meta-language which was so brief. You remember these grammarians? If they save half a matra, they were, overjoyed as if a son was born from them, okay? That was a saying that a Sanskrit grammarian, if he saves half a letter, he will be enjoyed as he got a son, right? So what I want to say is that this is a grammatical device. If you ask a question, Ashtadhyayi will put in function, in a mechanism will start, and this is completely new. Chomsky said that the only transformational grammar before him was Panini. So all this shows really the kind. And today we use sometimes algorithms of Panini to see how we can build rules, etc., etc. So this is very important. And now to finish my intervention, I said also before that there was another Sanskrit revolution, another path of communication where Sanskrit came to Europe. And this is very interesting. I have here a quotation because my country has something to say on that. Spain has something to say. It's very interesting because Sanskrit penetrated in the European medieval world through the Muslims. The Muslims, that had already came to India, were a change that took Sanskrit texts, they read them, they translated into Arabic, and as they did with Greek knowledge, they did also with Sanskrit knowledge. And it is said that, I will quote some, now Spain was a Muslim country at that time, Al-Andalus was taken by the Muslims. So one of the big Muslims, sultanates was just in Al-Andalus, in what we say Spain, right? And there you had authors like Al-Khwarizmi in mathematics, you had Avicenna in medicine, you have Al-Farghani in astronomy. And these people, Spain at that time was translating Arab works into Latin. And it is said that the first zero, which came to Europe through the Arabs, and that's called Arabic numerals, the first zero says in Spain, in El Escorial, because there was this school of translators from Toledo that start translating, in a big thing, all these Sanskrit texts. I finish. There was a Muslim author from Spain called Ibn al-Andalusi, and he was from a place called Almeria in South Spain. And I just quote this, and he wrote a book called Tabakat al-Umam, which is Categories of Nations. And look what the Muslims in Spain were saying about India in the 11th century. And then you will understand, how we are all connected and how things are really He says Ibn al-Andalusi in the 11th century. Among the nations of the world, over the passage of centuries and the passage of time, India was known as a veritable mine of wisdom and as a source of justice and good governance. The Indians have been regarded as individuals who demonstrate an excellent understanding of high ideas, of universal principles, of rare talents and inventions. They have studied arithmetic and astronomy. They have also acquired a wealth of knowledge on the movement of stars, the secrets of the celestial sphere, and of the various subtleties of the science of mathematics. Moreover, among all the peoples, they are the most knowledgeable in the science of medicine and have a thorough knowledge of the properties of medicinal plants, the nature of the compound elements, and the peculiarities of the existing things. So you may understand that the image of India, at least in the Muslim world in the Middle Age, was as a land of knowledge.
Thank you very much, Oscar. And I'll just add something to that, we're trying to make this knowledge known. But I think next year, probably at the festival, it's going to become rather more widely known because one of the esteemed directors, William Dalrymple's written a new book called The Golden Road, and a couple of chapters are all about exactly this. So I think this theme is going to become very prominent.
Thank you, and look forward to that. At this point, if anybody has a question, please feel free to ask so that we can, open up the discussion.
Panini is the 4th BC compiled the grammar of Sanskrit. I think is the only first grammar compilation. But he only also compiled. The grammar was in a language was prevalent only in Indian Sanskrit or some other languages. And what was the next compilation after Panini in any other language?
No, there were grammarians before Panini, and he quotes several. He was not the first one, although they are lost, no? And of course, we should never forget that there is another classical language in India, which is Tamil, and they have the Tolkappiyam and they have other grammars, so not everything ends with Sanskrit, okay? Tamil was also very, very important as a classical language.
The lady in the green.
Ma'am, actually, I don't have a question, but I would like to bring it to the notice of everyone that you have mentioned that plastic surgery may be an imaginative treasure, but actually it was not. We may all have heard about Sushruta. Maharishi Sushruta wrote his Sushruta Samhita, and it mentions about plastic surgery, including skin grafting, which is a very complicated procedure even today. So I don't think that plastic surgery could be an imaginative treasure, but maybe we could look more into that and bring it to the light of everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. How would you? Because there might be. I agree with her, and I see that there might be something that's described, but how was it possible, probably, without the methods and means that make plastic surgery in today's, like the medical methods and means that make it possible. So there might be a description of something that is similar, but how did they actually do it, would be my question.
Well, I mean, the trouble is, as a Sanskritist, it's like being a scholar of English or something. Sometimes people expect you to know everything about every single branch of Sanskrit wisdom, and as I'd said at the beginning, it's an ocean of treasures, and I'm afraid I'm no expert in Ayurveda or what's written in Sushruta. So I defer to the young lady, who I'm sure is correct that there are methods of such surgery described within the text. Yeah.
My question to James. James, I remember you from a session here in the year of the Kumbh Mela, when you were wearing Jata Jute and perhaps coming straight from the Kumbh. I moderated that session, I remember you. Yes, my question to you is, 30 million manuscripts, the mind boggles. And I love the quotation from Koshambi. One thing that I'd like you to tell us about is, are we any closer to discovering from those manuscripts any great literary classics of Sanskrit? Kalidasa, in his time in the 4th century, named 3 great poets who had lived before him, Bhasa, Saumila, and Kaviputra. And Bhasa was recovered only about 100 years ago, and we don't know anything about Saumila and Kaviputra. Are we any closer, or is the number 30 million? Because the printing press came to India pretty late, that's why. Are we closer? Do we have any inkling where we might find the great literary classics?
Well, yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, I was Jata Jute indeed. I think I was on my way to the Kumbh Mela, but I haven't seen a lot of people because I cut them off just before the COVID pandemic, so now I'm reappearing. And unfortunately, people still recognize me. I thought I'd be able to hide out. But of course, I think we are closer, but the problem is, to some extent, it's a race against time, isn't it? Because the manuscripts in India, especially written on paper, they and depending on where they are, but in most parts of India, they really don't last more than 200 or 300 years, so they have to be copied and copied and copied. I mean, projects like Namami going around, and they're, not only are they going to libraries, but they are. I remember being somewhere where they pitch up in a big bus with a digitization station within the bus, and they ask people, because of course, as I'm sure you know better than I do, many families in India, they will have collections of manuscripts within their homes. So they are asking people from these to bring manuscripts from their homes so they can be looked at, catalogued, digitized, and so forth. So really, and as you say, Bhasa, the other poets that we know existed, and some of the famous poets like Kalidasa, perhaps there are more works of theirs that are waiting there to be found, but it's only through this, Sanskrit's a really good example of how it's only through the really rather tedious work of things like cataloguing manuscripts and then collating them and reading them that you can build up to making these great discoveries. So one remains hopeful, but as I say, to some extent, it's a race against time.
I have a follow-up question to that, if I may, that the actual process of excavating a particular manuscript is also, as you were saying, going over different versions of it because it's been copied by hand over hundreds of years. So do you want to just tell us a bit about that how do you go to the original intended manuscript after going, and you have to go through several of the copied versions?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's the sort of root of the work that I do, is that if I want to work on a text, I want to produce a critical edition, and that involves finding all the manuscripts of the text that you can. And as Swati says, they will. It's highly unlikely. There's a couple of texts I've worked on that maybe we have the author's manuscript, but almost always they're copies of copies of copies of copies. So the job is, with my PhD, I worked on a text called the Khechari Vidya, which is about this rather esoteric Hatha Yoga practice. In fact, I see my publisher sitting in the front, who very kindly published the book with Indica Books, Alvaro. But I started out knowing of 6 manuscripts of the text being in existence. And I ended up with 30 of them, so that's my excuse for why it took 7 years rather than the 4 that it was supposed to. But then you have to look at every single one and compare the readings and try to establish what you think the original might have been. But also in that process, I mean, that again, this is the sort of tedious, painstaking scholarly work that the bigger picture is built upon. And a good example from that text that I worked on is that the earliest group of manuscripts, or the earliest form of the text that we could reconstruct, or I could reconstruct, often mention the word Madira, okay, where the later ones had Kechari, the name of the practice. Now, Madira in Sanskrit means alcohol. So what we know is that the earliest form of the text was from a sort of rather transgressive, unorthodox tantric tradition in which they used alcohol in their rituals and they had sexual rituals and so forth. But the later tradition changes this deliberately, consciously to Kechari. So it's, again, through this complex, difficult manuscript work that you can trace the development, the historical progression within a yogic tradition, in this example, over time.
So there have been have you found also manuscripts where people have put in their own bit while taking down, while copying? So it's not really a true copy. It's with their interpolations and so on.
Absolutely, that happens quite often, and you can sort of tell that maybe someone's written something in the margin to explain something, then someone's copied that and reintroduced that. And what you also find, there's a text I'm working on at the moment, it's a very famous text called the Hatha Pradipika, or the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is the most important, most influential text on physical yoga, and we're hoping to finish the critical edition, well, we've more or less finished it, publishing it at the end of the month on a website. And there are some quite sort of racy, tantric style practices. We know that they were there in the original form of the text, but some people just leave that section out, although one or two of the manuscripts we found move it from where it should be in the text, put it at the end, and then they have a little bit beforehand saying this is only for the more extreme practice, be careful before you read on, sort of
trigger warning.
Yeah, exactly, the Sanskrit version of a trigger warning.
Yes, any more questions? The lady there, please.
Thank you. I was just wondering, since you mentioned Tamil, why is it that European interest in the Tamil language is woefully short of their interest in the Sanskrit language? Is it because we don't trace it to the Indo-European family or something? I'm just wondering, since you mentioned Tamil, otherwise I wouldn't have raised that question.
No, perhaps that was, I don't know, I don't know, maybe you know better than me. Perhaps at the origin of Indology, the discovery of Indo-European language was a huge thing, okay? At the beginning, I mean, and 18th century, 19th century, that was, and the whole science of Indo-European studies developed. And perhaps, but I would like to say that the West also has done a lot of research on Tamil. And we have great scholars, I think one is Burroughs, that wrote also on Sanskrit, that he wrote about the influence of Tamil on Sanskrit, because that's very interesting also. And there is, and I can quote just one example, and I take it from I say my dictionary has two etymologies, one from Paninian tradition, and other from Western tradition. And if we take a word like Tulsi, you will see the difference between both. I maintain that 90% of the times it's the same, except for Unadi words, that's another thing. But it's very interesting. Tulasi, according to Panini, comes from a root and the word Tula. Tula, as you know, means balance. Huh? And it means a Tulania. Tulsi plant is Tulsi because it's a Tulani. You cannot compare to any other plant. That's the etymology. Now, if you want to the Sanskrit etymological dictionary, what Western savants are saying, after investigating, the Tulasi comes from Tamil. That's a very... And it gives the words in Tamil that are related to Tulasi, which seems to be earlier than the Sanskrit Tulasi. That's a very interesting point of view. We didn't know that. So, scholars like Burroughs, I think he has give a full description of all the influence of Tamil in Sanskrit. So we are very well aware of the importance of Tamil, and I think Tamil has incredible scholars also in the West. And wish there were more in India too.
Yes, this lady in front.
Can I sit and talk? It was a very informative session. I'm very thankful to you. And I am also proud of my country that Sanskrit is so popular in other countries in the world than it is in India. I'm so surprised that in schools and colleges, nobody takes Sanskrit. We take Urdu or English mainly. So I think we ought to change in India. I'm just not asking a question, I'm commenting on it. We have to change in our education system and do more research in India. There is a treasure hunt of knowledge in Sanskrit. I'm so glad in Puranas and the Vedas and all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Just one
Yes,
small.
please.
You say that, you know, I took Sanskrit at BHU, okay? And I was the only foreigner among Brahmins there at BA. And at that time, what people were saying at BHU, after that, it was not the case. People were getting admission in Sanskrit, you know why? Because you don't need a higher note, okay? So those who cannot take admission in other subjects, they take admission in Sanskrit in India. So that was the situation at least 30 years back. So to understand, you know, the lack of value that was given, at least at that time, so the worst students were going to Sanskrit because you don't need high marks to get enrollment there.
Yes, please.
Hi, I just want to say, ma'am, I study in a school of philosophy in New York, and at the advanced courses, they insist that you take courses in Sanskrit so that you can read the scriptures. And I'm regretting the fact that I paid no attention to it at all when I was in school in Delhi. So I guess I have to pay for it. There's something karmic about that. But my question was for you, James, is I also started studying yoga, physical yoga, Hatha Yoga, in the States. And there's endless debates about which is the more authentic form. And basically everything in America came from B.K.S. Iyengar and Batavi Joyce. And I don't know where they got it from. Honestly, I haven't done that much into it. But I don't think there's probably any one authentic form of yoga. But are there some traits, characteristics that one can look for that tell you that this is conducted in the more authentic or traditional or classical style?
Well, yeah, thanks again. A big topic. And yes, I mean, authenticity is a problematic notion in itself. Isn't it? I mean, one can look for things that are older, and I'd say that of the schools that you mentioned, so the students of T. Krishnamacharya from Mysore, so the most famous ones are Pattabhi Joyce and B.K.S. Iyengar. And I think one could say that Iyengar's yoga is probably more authentic, more similar to what we might find in, say, the Hatha Pradipika, this text I'm working on. A telltale sign is when you get these sequences of postures, which you get in Pattabhi Joyce's Ashtanga Yoga. We don't find that in any pre-modern text whatsoever. Okay, they always say, hold the posture for a long period. In fact, quite often they'll say, try all these different postures, and whichever one you like, just use that one. Whichever one's best, just stick to any one. This idea of a sequence with special linking vinyasas and so forth, that's very much a 20th century innovation. But again, I don't think that's... yoga has always changed with the times. If it hadn't, it'd be a very boring job to be a historian of yoga, because there'd be nothing to study. And it's always fitted in within the historical context within it, which it's in. So Krishnamacharya, Pattabhi Joyce, they were drawing on the new developments in global physical culture that they saw around them, and it was a brilliant, innovation, brilliant kind of entrepreneurship to create this new form that has, took the world by storm. So yeah, it may not be authentic, but that doesn't detract from its brilliance, I don't think.
We can take, I think, 3 more questions. This gentleman here.
Sir, during the Islamic invasions, a lot of universities were burnt. And a lot of scholarship that was burnt in India. We had a lot of scholars coming from China, from Tibet to India. And they had translated the works of Sanskrit into their languages. So to find those works which are lost over here in Sanskrit, maybe we can go through those Tibetan or the Chinese, manuscripts of the students who came to India or the scholars who came to India.
That would be in the Buddhist tradition primarily.
Absolutely right. have nothing to say.
Yeah, well, I
Absolutely
can
right.
give you an example from my own work, actually, a text that I recently published a critical edition of called the Amrita Siddhi, which is the first text to teach any of Hatha Yoga practices and principles. I only had manuscripts going back to perhaps the 17th century. The text was written in the 11th century until, through good luck, stroke of luck, got hold of a manuscript which was produced in the 12th century in Tibet. And it's fascinating in itself because it has the Sanskrit and then a Tibetan translation. And so, as you say, the older Indian manuscripts of that text have disappeared, but I was lucky enough to find one that's in Tibet. Yeah.
That's an interesting point because I think there is the Tibetan Institute in Varanasi, in Sarnath, yes, that is in the process of translating the Tibetan texts into, and which are actually very direct copies of Sanskrit texts. So this would be a space to watch, as they say, going forward.
But particularly useful for Buddhist studies, of course. Yeah.
Yes. This lady here.
Namaskar, everybody. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for stating that we are probably in the midst of another Sanskrit revolution, as people like me in their young 20s, in their early 20s, are interested in learning Sanskrit text. I'm a student of Sanskrit as well as Tamil, a student of Vedanta, Upanishads, and Yoga Sutra. My question here, because we spoke a little about Tamil and Sanskrit, I'm mostly stuck between, in a debate where people argue which is more ancient, is it Sanskrit or Tamil? And there are theories that, one has oral traditions which are older, probably one is written, so we Indians are stuck in this question that which is older. I really think there is no need to argue per se, but still we have that question. I'd like to know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I'm not sure that was a question. I completely agree with you. I mean, these things are sometimes tied up with sort of nationalistic issues, aren't they? And I don't think the question can be answered, and it's not particularly productive. So I wish everyone would study Tamil and Sanskrit more and unearth the treasures that are found in those languages.
Well, tracing the origin of language is very difficult, no? When really a language started, it's not that easy. But I am interested in your first comment when you say about the new interest in young people for Sanskrit. This fascinates me, I came back to India about 4 years ago, and I am now I'm based in Delhi for 1 year more. And when I came here after 7 years absence, I realized a big change here. And I realized that I even have in my mobile, I have a WhatsApp group by young Indians that they just speak Sanskrit, write Sanskrit, and all these people basically are engineers. And what I found is that IITs in India now are taking such interest in Sanskrit. Young engineers in India are coming back to Sanskrit. And that's a very interesting thing for me. If these people really get back into Sanskrit and you have not only engineers, young people.
Sorry, complete your point and then we are done.
Okay. And it's very encouraging. That's what I say. And it's like an irony of history, because many of those engineers, physicians, mathematicians that went to America, went to Europe, they were actually sons of pandits, They were people who belonged to the Sanskrit tradition that say we'll make more money being an engineer in the States than teaching Sanskrit in a village in India. And now it's like they are coming back to what they left. And I think there is a very beautiful turn of history in what is happening now in India.
Thank you very much, Oscar and Jim, for that wonderful discussion. Thank you all.